family, and welcome to the African Exodus show. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's African news segment, to remind you all, if you want to stay connected outside of YouTube, there's two ways you can do that. One is the free way. You can join my Telegram channel. The link to that is down in the description. Telegram is a decentralized app that I use to update anytime I post a video, any thoughts I want to share with the community. And also, that's the best place if you want to message me directly. So you can add yourself there. In addition, if you would like to join my Patreon channel and actually support this channel, you can do so with the link down below. There I will post a weekly exclusive just for you. So with that, let's get started with African and world news. So the UN Assembly just happened. I hope you all were watching, seeing what was being said about Africa. Africa kind of took front and center, took the podium. Many leaders took the podium to express their discontent with what their treatment inside of the global political sphere. And so we're going to talk about some of those speeches. The first one starting with the president of Kenya. So it says, at the UN, African leaders say enough is enough. They must be partnered with, not sidelined. Now, we'll talk about the wisdom of wanting to be a partner with the global force, but let's read through this article. It says, most of Africa has logged a lifetime of independence, roughly 60 years, and the continent of more than 1.3 billion people is conscious of the challenges stifling its development. You know, when you hear that Africa has been free for 60 years, I don't know why that seems like a lifetime. It seems very recent, and it kind of reminds you why Africa is so far behind. Some people want to start like today is what has been happening. No, there's a long history of colonialism. There's a long present reality of colonialism. Africa being free only 60 years, that's not a long time. So we have to keep that in mind. There's also a new boldness, it says, that comes with the African Union's G20 seat. It says, and this is what Kenya's president William Ruto said, he said, we as Africa have come to the world not to ask for alms, charity, or handouts, but to work with the rest of the global community to give every human being in this world a decent chance of security and prosperity. This is going to be very relevant with the next news story that we're going to cover, because Kenya, again, is going to be going into Haiti, or they're preparing to go into Haiti. So it's not a coincidence that he wants to give the world a chance at security and prosperity, so he says. Now it says, in recent years, Africa has been clear about its capacity to become a global power, from efforts to tackle climate change at home, such as the existential threat of climate change upending lives and livelihood in the region, despite Africa contributing by far the least to global warming, to helping foster peace elsewhere, like in Russia and Ukraine. Why Africa feels like they have to be the ones to be on the forefront of global warming or fossil fuel being emitted into the air while they contribute the least to it. It's just the mentality that's been given to us. This is supposedly a win for Africa, being the one to try to reverse something that they're not in charge of. So this just tells you right here that their intention in being at the UN is not necessarily to become a global power. If they were so serious about being a global power, they would have called out the West and China for their contributions to fossil fuel usage, instead of being used as someone who's going to be the one who's going to take all the hits while your more powerful nations are going unscathed. So we can see what's happening right here. It's not about power. It's really about compliance. And that's how Africa has been trying to get recognition inside of the world spirit, is by complying with Western hegemony. And that's not going to equal power. Obviously, if you're complying with someone, you can't be a powerhouse in yourself. You're following someone else's protocols, regardless of whether or not they pertain to the reality of your actual people and your actual continent. But let's go on and see some more things that were said at the UN Assembly. So it says, in his address, President Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, blamed Africa's present-day challenges on historical injustices and called for reparations for the slave trade. President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa said the continent is poised to regain its position as the site of human progress despite dealing with a legacy of exploitation and subjugation. Nigeria's leader, Bola Tinubu, urged his peers to see the region not as a problem to be avoided, but as true friends and partners. Three very different messages coming from three African presidents. Nana Akufo-Addo, who we know has been on record for a number of times expressing his discontent with the colonial situation, although I would say he's done little to nothing to change his relationship to those colonial powers. He's often voiced his discontent with the West. So him saying that he is calling for reparations for the slave trade and for colonialism, that's not surprising coming from him. It would be more surprising coming from Tinubu of Nigeria, but it's not surprising coming from him. Cyril Ramaphosa saying that Africa is poised to regain its position as a site of human progress. Again, typical. Also typical, though, is this sentiment coming from Bola Tinubu, who wants Africa to be a partner with the world. So let's just slow down and think about the implications of being a partner with your oppressor, because Africa is still colonized. Neocolonialism is still the causing the abstraction of resources on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis out of the African continent, yet you want to be partners with those who are abstracting your wealth. And that's the mentality that he has taken into negotiations with Niger. He wants to be partners with the West. He wants to be partners with the exploiter. Is that going to be something that is going to be for the benefit of Africa? No, that's going to be to the benefit of individual leaders. He might feel like a partner. He might have some consultation side of issues, but overwhelmingly the people will be left behind. So essentially he's asking for the same old as far as the discourse between the African nations and the Western powers. So it's not surprising coming from him. Now, Ghana's President Akufo-Addo said that correcting an unfair world order must begin with the payment of reparations from the era which approximated 12.5 million people were enslaved, according to often referenced transatlantic slave trade databases. It is time to acknowledge openly that much of Europe and the United States has been built from the vast wealth harvested from sweat, tears, blood, and horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and the centuries of colonial exploitation. So something that's very interesting here. He says that this is the first step to correcting an unfair world order. You should ask yourselves, when has reparations being requested versus demanded or ordered ever been a reality? When has reparations ever been good for a people when they're still being raped, exploited, and subjugated by that same power? It doesn't make sense to ask for reparations for something that's still happening. I've always said that. If we're going to talk about reparations, shouldn't we talk about stopping the bleeding? Is Akufo-Addo not aware, and I think he's very aware, that Africa has continued to face a colonial regime, from the businesses to the military complex, from the international institutions or international organizations, even the nonprofit sector, that are all collaborating together in order to ensure that Africa is not empowered. So it's an unfair world order for a reason, and reparations is not the first step. The first step to actually ending the unfairness would be for a continent to wake up and cut off the relationship to the oppressor. But Akufo-Addo does not want that to happen, because these are the people who are paying for a lot of the leaders to live a luxurious life, paying for them and their families to live well while the people and the masses are suffering. So it's important to have context there. But it says a seat at the table, something that a phrase that I hate, because I often read it in the context of Africans in America. It says a seat at the table. The continent relies heavily on foreign aid for its development needs. How has that been going? Has foreign aid actually gone towards development or underdevelopment? If you understand the implications of foreign aid, how targeted it is, and how it seeks to ensure dependence rather than independence, you understand foreign aid is not a need. it's not a need of Africa. It's actually a need of the West. It's actually a need of the powerhouses. They need you to buy into the idea of foreign aid in order so that they can still abstract from you, control your economies, order you as far as how you're going to structure your entire land. So going on, it says, receiving the largest share of total global aid, that's Africa, according to the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Still, it continues to suffer from a global financial system that forces its countries to pay 8 times more than the wealthiest European nations, resulting in surging debt that eats up what is left of dwindling government revenues. So what's the takeaway from the UN from this year? The takeaway is that African leaders are not saying anything any different than what they have already said. Now, we'll talk about Burkina Faso. They had a very different statement. We'll talk about that towards the end. But overwhelmingly, the African leaders are not doing anything different. Akufo-Addo has a history of calling out the fact that the West has a history of exploiting, yet he doesn't have the same history of pointing to the current realities that are exploitation and calling for them to end. Similarly, we have a long history of African countries wanting to partner with their oppressors instead of unseat their oppressors. Truth be told, if you want to understand true power, you would take your eyes off of what's going on at the United Nations, understanding that it's a very controlled group. If you want to look at the true powerhouse in the United Nations, you wouldn't even look at the General Assembly. You would look at the Security Council, of which Africa is not a permanent member. So the entire presence at an unfair institution to begin with, the entire idea that I'm going to grace you with my presence at an unfair and colonially created institution is one that we can know is not sincere. These people aren't sincere when you are sitting amongst your oppressor, watching them lord over you and having no issue with calling out their grievances, not in the past, but in this exact moment. Yet you will talk all day about what you would like them to do to remedy the past without even putting demands on those clear demonstrations of the violations of human rights. So again, nothing new, nothing surprising. So with that, let's go to the next story. So this is a big one. Kenya has signed a defense agreement ahead of planned Haiti deployment. I keep telling you all because something's not happening in the here and now, or because it's not happening quickly, don't think that it's not happening. They are making affirmative plans for the UN to invade Haiti under the direction of the United States government. Kenya and the US signed a defense agreement Monday that will see the East African nation get resources and support for security deployments as it is poised to lead a multinational peacekeeping mission to Haiti to combat gang violence. When have you ever heard of a multinational police force initiative where everyone's going to come together just for gang violence? Clearly, there's another agenda. As we've talked about many times, it's about trying to stop Haiti from being a rogue nation. It's about trying to force Haiti into compliance with the international world order. That's their only goal. Otherwise, they would be using those same resources to deal with their own gang problems or own issues of terrorism, which we know Kenya has suffered from. So this is all talk, obviously. We have to be the ones to see through it and call it out. Kenya's Defense Ministry, Aden Duale, and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin signed the accord at a meeting in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi. The agreement guides the country's defense relations for the next 5 years as the war in East Africa against Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab extremist group intensifies. Austin thanked Kenya for volunteering to take the leadership of the Haiti multinational force and reiterated that the U.S. government would work with Congress to secure the $100 million in funding it pledged on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Let's let this soak in because we've been told that America's not going to go into Haiti. They're not going to lead this invasion because they know that they are not liked in Haiti. They know that they are correctly identified as the cause and the source of much of the despair that Haitian people suffer. So despite the fact that America said we're not going to go in, they're going to put up other countries to go in. They're going to fund them. They're going to give them military equipment. They're going to give them directions and commands. Don't let that go unrecognized. They're still going to be giving them commands. Despite this very present U.S. presence, they're still here and significant ways. Despite that, we're going to look at this as being Kenyan-led, as being African-led. I mean, I encourage you all, go back to the past videos I've done about this issue in recent months about Kenya preparing to invade Haiti. This is being used as a way or propaganda is being used as a way to hide the hand of the United States. Propaganda such as African unity and pan-Africanism, which this is not. All of this is being done, again, in order to allow the United States to do what it really wanted to do originally, that is invade Haiti without having to give account and receiving the backlash. Instead, they'll be using Kenya to do so. Kenya in August pledged to send 1,000 security officers to Haiti to combat gang violence in a mission that is pending the UN Security Council's formal approval, but has received support from the United Nations and the United States. Douale said his country is ready to deploy Haiti and cited Kenya's very long history of global peacekeeping in Kosovo and neighboring Somalia and Congo. Some security analysts have expressed, this is a good point, concerns that there will be a language barrier between deployment from Kenya and English and Swahili speaking country and the people of Haiti, where the official language is French and Creole. That's a very good question. How are you going to have a peacekeeping mission of people who don't even speak the same language? Well, if they're going in for gang violence, I can tell you they don't mean to be speaking much. They mean to be shooting. They mean to be terrorizing. So I guess they aren't concerned about the language barrier there. So as we said, again, this invasion is imminent. They're showing the signs, they're showing the talk, they're making their plans clear to the world. And the Haitian people, unfortunately, have been abandoned by so many of the neighboring African and Caribbean nations who should be vocal against this, who should be seeing this as a way to subvert their sovereignty. But unfortunately, all of them are sold out too. And so it's really a matter of time. And we hope and pray that the people of Haiti can defend themselves from this imperialist force. So definitely keep Haiti in your prayers and your thoughts and prayers, because they're making plans for this. It's very clear, and it's not a good thing. Some people think it's a good thing. They see the news coverage of Haiti and think, oh, this is one-sided. No, all of these things are being stoked by U.S. intelligence. When they say gang violence, when have you ever heard of the U.S. finding countries in order to invade another country for gang violence? This is something that's purposeful. It's a narrative that helps benefit the imperialist state, and that's why they are ordering an invasion of a country that really shouldn't even be on their radar, just given the fact that it's such a small island nation. But again, it's about compliance, forced compliance by the West. So let's go to the next story. Supposedly, there's a government shutdown in the wind in the United States that would have implications for the entire world. So once again, we're put in a situation where we have to remember that those of us who are living in the United States, many of us are living in what is essentially a failed state, although it doesn't appear to be so. It still has the money, it still has the currency, it still has the bravado of military force, yet things aren't working in this country. And when things don't work inside of a country, particularly one that is structurally, implicitly a racist state, what happens is that the people who are the most exploited are going to suffer the most, even though technically our interests as African people should not be aligned with the United States, if you think about the history there. So it's being warned that there's going to be a shutdown. And as this article from The Root says, Black Americans should be alarmed by potential government shutdown. So let's see why. It says, the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on September 26 had millions of Americans bracing that on September 25th, 2023, for the pay and welfare checks to stop within days as Congress careened towards a damaging government shutdown with Republican right-wingers blocking attempts to pass a budget. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has 5 days to get his caucus to agree to a passable spending package before the country is propelled into a calamitous government shutdown. You might say, again, this happens a lot. We probably don't always hear about it, but this has been happening for a long time. At the last minute, usually the budget gets passed. However, you never know. There always could be a future government shutdown that actually leads to a shutdown of the entire country. Now it says, with just days left on the clock, things are still nowhere near settled. Members of the far-right House Freedom Caucus are demanding massive spending cuts to programs millions of Americans rely on, particularly in educational services for low-income Americans. Yes, that's going to be on the chopping block, people. The House is expected to vote on Tuesday on a measure advancing a spending package, which, despite containing massive cuts, still might fail to satisfy the hardliners in the House. And the bill is a non-starter for the Democratic-controlled Senate, which is closing in on a deal to keep spending at current levels. So, according to the Center for American Progress, immediately inspections of drinking water facilities and hazardous waste sites would cease. The USDA would pause loans for farmers. Have we been receiving those loans? That's another question. The FDA would have to limit food inspections. It's kind of like, are these the areas that are actually working well right now? Because we know the USDA has neglected Black farmers, and we also know that the FDA has neglected to do their job at inspecting food. But this is the thing that are going to shut down. Many preschools and school readiness centers would close. I'm not even going to say anything about the preschools and school readiness centers. The longer the shutdown, the more vital government services are at risk as contingency funds for these programs begin to dwindle. The bigger picture, particularly for Black Americans, is what happens if a government shutdown isn't just a few days. At that point, we start seeing cuts to programs that Black Americans, because of systemic economic inequality, disproportionately rely on, such as food assistance, temporary assistance for needy families, and housing vouchers. In the immediate aftermath of the shutdown, the White House has already warned that WIC, which as of 2018 fed an estimated 1.6 million Black mothers and babies every year, will halt services. None of this even accounts for the fact that Black Americans are somewhat overrepresented in the federal workforce, who would all be temporarily out of a job. So this is the dark reality for those of us who have felt that we could rely on a government that historically should not be relied on. That's what reason I wanted to cover this particular story. I keep trying to remind our people on this channel who watch that these services are not being given to us to ensure our autonomy. They're not being given to us in order to ensure our independence. They're not being given to us in order to ensure our empowerment. If you're talking about power, you can't feel empowered as a people when your government that has a historic relationship of being a racist, bigoted institution with multiple levels could give out at any moment, and literally all the things that you've depended on are gone. What will you do? Don't believe people who don't want you to plan for what would you do if the government were not able to deliver on services that we've become dependent on. The same people who also don't want you to think about what would you do if the supply chain were cut. These are serious issues that have happened historically, have happened in America historically, not just in other countries far away. And yet our people are not aware of the fact that we are in a very delicate situation. We rely on a big power that is a failed state to continue long enough in order for us to get through our lives, and then hopefully our children will be able to bear better than us. It's just not a smart or intelligent position to put yourself in as a community. So hopefully these government shutdowns are waking people up. This government is not going to last very long. America is falling very fast. Babylon is falling very fast. The country has lost its top spot in many ways, and it's only going to become more clear as time proceeds and as we see a war coming with Russia, for example. So with that, let's go to the next story. So I said we would talk about Burkina Faso because it was a different message coming from Burkina Faso. So Burkina Faso hits out at France, ECOWAS, the UN, and homosexuality at the UN Assembly. Burkina Faso hit out at the diplomatic hypocrisy of France, the United Nations, and other West African states for their treatment of Sahelian countries and their threats to Niger, including its exclusion from speaking at the General Assembly. In a 38-minute speech read in the UN General Assembly on September 23rd, on behalf of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso's transitional government, Minister of State Basolama Bazi criticized France for blocking military supplies to the landlocked West African nation, which has been beset by jihadist insurgency, and President Emmanuel Macron's paternalism towards Sahelian states. While it's true that the West has raped, violated, and robbed Africa, what's our share of responsibility as African leaders, he said, adding that the African leaders had abandoned their identity, changed their names, and become monogamous. There will be no question of homosexuality here. Despite recent visits from senior members of Russia's Ministry of Defense and by Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Bazi dismissed reports that the country has formally established a relationship with the Wagner group, Kremlin-linked paramilitary organization that was formerly controlled by the late Yevgeny Prigozhin, I know I didn't pronounce his name right, and is absorbed in Russia's armed forces. The minister added that Burkina Faso would enter into sovereign partnerships with whomever it chooses. It buys defense assets from whoever it chooses, whether the country is called Russia, Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Cuba, Nicaragua, or North Korea. Burkina Faso will freely buy and sell its products there without any intermediary, let alone authorization from anyone else, and that come what may. Bazi referred to what he called the double standard of Western countries, calling volunteer fighters in Ukraine patriots, and the West supplying weapons to help the country defend itself against Russia, while the U.S. cut off military aid to Burkina Faso and its security and defense forces, as well as an estimated 50,000 mobilized volunteer fighters. Instead, he said outsiders were characterizing the Burkinabe soldiers as militias. So a lot was said by Mr. Bazi. So first of all, obviously, I agree with a lot of the sentiment being expressed, whether it's saying, hey, we're going to trade with whoever we want to trade with. We don't have to listen to you. We don't have to follow your cultural norms. You know, we are people who can decide things for ourselves. But at the same time, you have to look into what is the relationship that's being displayed here. He says that there's a double standard of certain Western countries calling volunteer fighters in Ukraine patriots, and the West supplying weapons to help the country defend itself against Russia, while the U.S. has cut off military aid to Burkina Faso and its security defense forces, as well as an estimated 50,000 mobilized volunteer fighters. So I wanted to understand a little bit more when he said the U.S. cut off aid to Burkina Faso. So I did look up and find this article, and it's not well printed around the news, even though it was written by, or around the web, even though it was written by the Wall Street Journal. But it says the United States seeks to help Burkina Faso's military junta fight jihadists. Officials want to counter Islamists, but U.S. law bans most security aid to military regimes. This was written on April 8th, 2023. Now it says the Biden administration is quietly helping Burkina Faso's ruling junta and Al-Qaeda and Islamic State in a hotly contested corner of West Africa without running afoul of U.S. laws banning most security aid to military regimes. The U.S. has included Burkina Faso commandos in American-led exercises, but excluded the West African country's top officer from an international gathering of defense chiefs after a military takeover last year. The Pentagon has a team of U.S. Green Berets stationed in Burkina Faso's capital, but won't allow them to train the local counterparts. The State Department pays civilian contractors to prepare Burkina Faso police and to fight militia groups as permitted by U.S. law, but the Defense Department can't do the same for military combat forces. The administration hopes such low-level American security assistance will be enough to help contain the flash flood spread of jihadist groups across a swath of Africa, while convincing Burkina Faso's military rulers not to follow neighbor Mali and hire Kremlin-linked Wagner group mercenaries. So this is something that's very significant and important to emphasize, that America did not cut off aid to Burkina Faso. America is trying to do things through back channels, as America often does, because technically they're not allowed to fund Burkina Faso's military anymore. So you might be wondering, well, as far as Burkina Faso's military, how linked in were they with the U.S. military state? So it goes into more details. It says neither Burkina Faso's charged affairs in Washington nor a spokesperson for its Ministry of Defense responded to requests for comment. They said, considering our security situation, we still need the United States, said one high-ranking Burkina Faso officer involved in international military cooperation. We have a relationship with them. It says, before the coups, the U.S. was deeply involved with Burkina Faso's military. In 2019, Burkina Faso hosted U.S.-led exercises for 2,000 commandos from 32 African and Western militaries, training intended to improve battlefield performance of local troops against Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Burkina Faso Army Lieutenant Paul Henry Damiba, who later led the first military coup, he attended an American-sponsored intelligence course in Senegal and a State Department peacekeeping program. In 2020, he attended U.S.-led commando training in Mauritania. That same year, the U.S. Embassy in Burkina Faso's capital said that the U.S. trained and equipped some 3,000 Burkina Faso troops annually, including $2 million program to help locals defend against roadside booby traps set by militants. The Biden administration has left the Green Beret team still today inside of Burkina Faso's capital, even though the soldiers can't train local counterparts, according to the American officials. U.S. officials say the Green Berets monitor the local security situation and are brokering negotiations about sending Burkina Faso commandos for training in neighboring Niger at a base in the Sahara. Those talks are underway, according to senior Nigerian official. Obviously, that did not happen because of the coup in Niger. So what is all of this saying? If you don't know, it was not just France that had a close relationship with Burkina Faso prior to there being a coup. The United States had a very close relationship with Burkina Faso, and we have to ask, do they still have a close relationship with Burkina Faso? So we know that the United States cannot publicly say that they have this relationship because they're not allowed to fund military juntas. Instead, they have chosen to lessen that relationship for the public sphere, but they're still having some aid to the degree that is allowed by U.S. law, meaning the Burkina Faso people, maybe they were not aware of this law or the fact that the United States will have to step down their aid to them. They're actually not happy with this arrangement. So going back to the anti-imperialist sentiment, anyone who's asking for U.S. military aid, and that was literally said in the speech. Let's go back to, so that I can quote from the speech. He said that there were double standards of certain Western countries calling volunteer fighters in Ukraine patriots in the West supplying weapons to help the country defend itself against Russia, while the U.S. cut off military aid to Burkina Faso and its security and defense forces, as well as an estimated 50 million mobilized volunteer fighters. So that lets you know, he has an issue with the United States cutting off a lot of its aid as is required by U.S. law. Whatever aid the United States is still giving to Burkina Faso is not enough in the eyes of Burkina Faso. I only present this information so that you have a fuller picture. I agree with a lot of the things that were espoused by Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traore. However, I have to always question anyone who would want assistance from the United States, who would request it, and who would have had such a close relationship with this country to begin with, to where they would be trained, the coup leaders, if not Ibrahim himself, the original coup leader, would have been trained by the United States intelligence themselves. So I'm just presenting the information. I don't have all the facts. Definitely interested to hear your thoughts. With that, let's go to the next story. I wanted to do this last story because I think messaging from the media is very important for us to be able to read. Some of us only read the title of articles and think that we have the whole story. So when you read this story, the title being Wagner's African hosts, plural, regret letting them in, you would think that all the countries that have let Wagner, the Russian mercenary group, into their territory regret letting them in. But let's read the fine details. The United States has heard from multiple African countries that they regret giving access to the Russian paramilitary Wagner Group. Current and former U.S. military and defense officials said, as the Biden administration tries to use the interregnum in the group's control to halt its advance. U.S. defense and military officials have had conversations with representatives of several African nations in recent months, indicating a growing frustration with Wagner over human rights abuses and the targeting of civilians. Wagner has significant military forces in the Central African Republic, Mali, and Libya, and has sent advisors and liaisons in other countries, including Sudan and Mozambique. The Russian mercenary outfit present is a way for the Kremlin to extend its influence into Africa while ostensibly fighting terrorism. It's funny they say that because that's exactly what France and the U.S. have been doing in Africa, trying to supposedly fight terrorism when they're actually there for their own interests. But I digress. We've had countries come to us and say, we don't want to be dependent on Wagner. We are seeing problems in their presence, said a U.S. defense official who spoke on the condition of being anonymous based rules set by the Pentagon. We are seeing a growing understanding that this is, at minimum, a double-edged sword, at worst, a net negative for countries that have enabled Wagner presence. So this is just so funny because U.S. military presence is not a two-edged sword, according to the source. But one political faction that has expressed regret about giving access to Wagner forces is Eastern Libyan enclave led by the warlord Khalifa Haftar, whose deputies have privately conveyed to the United States regret about hosting Wagner forces, according to Stephen Townsend, a retired four-star Army general who served as a head of the U.S. Africa Command last year. Wagner's forces have proved ineffectual in counterterrorism and fighting in Mali and Libya and have been connected with disappearances, mass killings, and other grave abuses. Clearly, what is said in the title is not actually inside of the body of the text. Saying that Wagner's African hosts are regretting letting them in, and then just saying, well, we can't really name who these countries are, but we've been talking to people and they say that they regret letting them in, and then citing a U.S. former army general who is no longer in position but was last year, who said, yeah, I've had conversations with other countries about this. Yeah, they regret it. Talking about Libya, which is kind of different than, let's say, Mali, Burkina Faso, or Niger, in that they're not a part of this coup belt. Libya, who has been occupied by the United States after they bombed and destroyed their country, their legitimate country that exists, existed legitimately under Muammar Gaddafi and safely and peaceably under Muammar Gaddafi. They are going to use Libya, the now very different country that has a proxy government put in place by the West. They're going to use them as an example because they talked to some Libyan forces who have expressed to the United States that they are not happy with Wagner being inside of their country. Do you understand when you're being lied to? Now, the reason why they're putting these narratives out there is because, as we said, Wagner is being poised in the media as being a terrorist organization. It's very important the UK government just declared them a terrorist organization. If countries are anonymously telling the United States government that we don't want these guys here, we don't know what to do with them, we really don't want them, and that's happening, if the United States were to declare them a terrorist organization as the United Kingdom did, then that would be the basis for the next war that you're going to see throughout the African continent and the world. One where the United States is really targeting Russia, really targeting China, yet using the African people for proxy in order to fulfill their interests. That is ridding the continent of their enemies, their adversaries, Russia and China. So I hope you understand how things are being said in the media to stir up a narrative, the same way it was done with Haiti. It took a long time to get where we are with Haiti to where we have an imminent invasion about to happen. It took a long time to get there because they had to continue with the narrative of a country that was failed and that needed help, and that the United States wanted to help and they couldn't help, so we need someone to help. Now here we are with this new narrative. These countries, they have Wagner inside of their territory. They're being disturbed by them. They're being terrorized by them. We need to help them. There's a narrative that's being built up, and I think it's going to become very relevant very soon as far as seeing what way the African continent's going to go with the United States presence inside of it. So that's all I have for this week. I thank you all for watching and supporting this channel. I will see you all, y'all willing, next week.
Okay, Reverend Jackson.
I hope that in our analysis of it, we don't conclude that we ain't winning. We're winning. There's going to be an election in South Africa a few months from now because we winning. There was a Middle East agreement signed on the White House lawn last Monday because we got the scars in our bodies. We're winning. We came here 30 years ago for the March on Washington. From Texas across to Florida up to Virginia, we couldn't use a single public toilet. We could not use a single hotel. We couldn't drink water from a single fountain. We did not have the right to vote. We didn't have a congressional black caucus. We didn't have 400 black mayors. We did not have the capacity to even think about foreign affairs, dealing in private survival. But just like when David knocked down Goliath, he couldn't go and party because Goliath wasn't no eunuch, he had some babies. And you knock down Jim Crow and you got Jim Crow Esquire. The giants keep coming. And so do not end up in a way you say, well, what can we do? Well, we, in fact, the laws that trapped South Africa of apartheid in 1948 came from here, from the 1896 laws. What Mandela is trying to do now is what we achieved in 1965. The fact is, we are winning, and our struggling has not been in vain, but there are some different options. For example, when Dr. King would make the case that we just end racism by law and get inside the plant gate with an education, we can grow. That was a period of economic growth. Now we get inside the plant, and the plant is closed. There's a very different context in which we operate. Zero economic growth among the industrial nations of the world is a factor in this. The economic downturn cannot be ignored. Lastly, we beat legislation with Jim Crow, but now Jim Crow Esquire regulation. The giants keep coming. And I would say lastly, Aristide is on his way back to Haiti because of us. Mandela got out of jail because of us. We're going to bring that matter to a resolution in Nigeria because of us. And now there will be an urban policy because we will not back down. So in the face of all of these challenges, do not assume that our struggles have been in vain and not productive.
I'll take some brief comments from Minister Farrakhan and Representative Waters and then go to your questions.
The scripture teaches, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And it is ignorance that is the worst enemy of the rise of our people to fulfill our destiny. That ignorance is fed on by corrupt leadership. Now, the scripture again says Woe to the shepherds who feed themselves and not the flock. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? Most of our leaders are handpicked by the very enemy that we're trying to get free from. It's all right for us to say we have a voting rights bill and a public accommodations bill, and all of us, including myself, have benefited from those bills. But to get a public accommodations bill and a voting rights bill and then close black hotels because we sleep in white ones, or close black establishments so that we can spend our money with our oppressor, is not winning. Reverend Jackson, I submit. Wait. On one hand, we are winning because every one of these brilliant congresspersons, they represent us. They are brilliant men and women. These are brilliant people in front of us. But what good does it do to have a brilliant head not connected to a black body? I submit. That until and unless we as a mass connect with the Congressional Black Caucus and our black leaders connect to the black masses, and don't take your eye off the prize, because now you can sit in boardrooms and be media folk now, because little black people marched in the streets and suffered and went to jail to make openings for those of us who sit in leadership. Now we've got to unite at the top and develop strategies to free our people. Otherwise, we will be saying we're winning, but the masses keep losing. So if the masses keep losing, then we can't be winning unless our agenda is personal. We're looking for self-aggrandizing. But if we're looking for the liberation, if we want the liberation of our people, then ain't none of us winning until all of us become winners.
Are you finished?
Yeah.